Joining me now is political analyst Mark Halpern and Newsmax columnist, former Pennsylvania congressional candidate and executive director of Iranian Americans for Liberty, Bryan Leib. Gentlemen, welcome. Mr. Leib, we'll begin with you. It was revealed the other day that Joe Biden will combat skyrocketing gas prices by relieving tariffs on China's solar panels. You heard that right. Investing in China's solar panels is how Biden is going to solve our gasoline woes. Now we learn that China is in violation of America's sanctions on the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, and that Team Biden is doing nothing to punish the communists for their violation. What does this tell you?
Chris, it's good to be back with you and good to be back on with Mark as well. Listen, I don't think your viewers should be surprised at the least that the Biden administration has chosen not to enforce any of these sanctions. This seems to kind of be their modus operandi when they're dealing with the Islamic Republic of Iran and especially with China. And a good example of that, Chris, is the fact that over the last 12 to 14 months, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been selling crude oil to China. This is to the tune of over $1 billion almost every single month that the Iranians are netting. Now, the story on this is the fact that there are sanctions on the books right now that prohibit the Chinese government from purchasing this oil. And if the Biden administration wanted to enforce these sanctions, they could, but they are not. And what that has led to is the Islamic Republic of Iran's international reserves going from around $4 billion, which was when Trump left office, to now over $40 billion in international reserves. So that's a lot more money to fund terrorism and a lot more money to murder, censor, and oppress the Iranian people.
True enough. You know, Mark, whether it's earned or not, the Democrats are viewed as the enablers and supporters of communist China in the United States. Politically, are Americans ignorant of the threat that China poses? Thus, this is not going to harm Democrats at the ballot box? Or is the converse true?
No, being tough on China is a bipartisan preoccupation in Washington, and it is in the country. To be fair, if you look at the Trump administration's record, the Bush administration's record, the last two Republican presidents, they didn't have much luck with China and Iran either. What's happening now, though, is that this administration's been in office for over a year. They still don't really have a specific China policy. And we see China not just on the margin in the Middle East with Iran, but in Asia, of course, in Latin America. This is a huge problem, and the administration has failed to figure out how to get more leverage over China. I can't imagine a more combustible combination than China and Iran teaming up on a security issue. And unfortunately, the United States is largely powerless to do anything about it. Tough talk, tough rhetoric isn't going to do it.
Oh, well, amen to that. And I can think of something just a little more explosive. It's the triumvirate that I mentioned: Russia, China, and Iran. Mr. Leib, according to the Iranian army commander, one of them anyway, Iran is going to demolish the cities of Tel Aviv and Haifa if Israel, quote, makes any mistakes. Meanwhile, Team Biden has given Russia negotiating power over our nuclear negotiations with Iran. I mean, what could go wrong? Has this administration put us in a surrender posture, in your view?
Well, I think they've certainly surrendered American leadership and the power of American leadership on a global scale. And more importantly, I think they've also sent a very clear message to our allies, such as Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and many others, that they're far more interested in kind of creating this new power and the power structure in the Middle East, one where the Islamic Republic of Iran stands to benefit the most. The Islamic Republic of Iran, their leadership are much different from their people. The Iranian people, I get messages all the time from people inside of Iran that tell me they want peace with Israel. They love America and that they cherish American values. But of course, the regime in Tehran says a much different thing. So the very fact that they're threatening to level Tel Aviv and raise Haifa once again should be another disclaimer for why we should not be doing diplomacy with the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. It's time to pivot back to maximum pressure, maximum sanctions, and do everything we can to stand with our allies in the region, because we know that they're going to be there tomorrow. We're not sure that the Islamic Republic, the regime, is going to be there tomorrow, but we know our allies will be there tomorrow. We need to stand with them.
All right, Mark, two-part question to you. Is foreign policy going to factor into the midterm elections, number one? And number two, what you doing at Fenway?
Well, I'll answer the second one first. Second night of Paul McCartney. And I've seen one other concert at Fenway Park. To see Paul McCartney at Fenway Park is, for me, about as good as it gets. So that's why I'm here. The answer to your first question is I think foreign policy will play in at least two ways. One is competence. Bill O'Reilly talked about it. Joe Biden's polling descent began with the incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan. It's something that they never really grappled with from a PR point of view or a military point of view. And I think a lot of Americans took a look at a guy who ran on competence, who'd been involved in national security for decades. And I think that's hurt his standing with the American people on competence. And then second, obviously, the war in Ukraine. I think you have to give the administration high marks for rallying the world against Putin. But if that war continues and it has a continuing effect on inflation, there's no doubt that Americans are going to say, how are we dealing with this war if it's raising prices here at home?
Bryan Leib and Mark Halperin on the Run. That was a Paul McCartney song, Band on the Run. Everybody remember that? Okay, guys, have a great day. Appreciate the time. Coming up, one of the survivors of the Uvalde, Texas school shooting recalls her experience during a congressional hearing today. We're going to show you. Plus, Democrat donor Harvey Weinstein is in more legal trouble in the UK. Details on those charges coming up next on Newsmax.